everybody. Welcome to the world's greatest Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I'm your co-host, Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Marvel graphic novel, The Amazing Spider-Man Parallel Lives.
That's actually, Josh, I'm going to correct you. It's Parallel Lives. This is the return of supervillain Parallel. We've been waiting for him to come back this whole time. Here he is. Parallel Lives. Okay, and joining... I'm kidding. That's what I thought when I was 13 years old, and I was like, who's Parallel? Anyway, okay,
I was about to say, maybe I shouldn't recap this, because I don't remember that at all.
I was like, you joke, but that's absolutely something that it could do. Hi,
yes,
I'm here.
100%. Thank you for joining us, Bex Luthor.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to see how Parallel comes back to life.
Me too. It's going to be a good one. And also joining us, special guest, Pork Carrot, a.k.a. Bob. Thanks for joining us, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
Woo!
Yeah.
Had you ever read Parallel Lives before this week?
I had not. I'd never heard of Parallel Lives.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Well, just for those keeping track, this is, I think, the fourth Spider-Man graphic novel we reviewed, and unfortunately, it'll be the last on Here Comes the Spider-Cast, because we're only covering 80s Spidey, so the end is nigh, folks. So yeah, mark it on your calendars. We'll be done soon, so... Anyway, I feel as though a
Flip
million
to the page that
voices
says
just
soon
cried
and
out.
Circle it.
What's that? Yeah, there you go. Okay. So, Josh, you're going to tell us what the rough plot was of this thing.
Right.
And then we're going to review it.
Okay. So, essentially, we're kind of getting a recap of Peter Parker and Spider-Man's origin. And we're kind of going through the years and recapping some like important points in time, mainly revolving around MJ. And we're seeing this almost through MJ's eyes at times. And we're kind of seeing how Peter and MJ had very similar lives growing up and how their destinies have always kind of been intertwined. And it all leads up to their marriage at the end of the book, which is kind of like bringing us to present time in the comics in 89 as we're reading through right now. So we see the origin of Peter Parker. We kind of get a recap about his parents and how he lives with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. We also see MJ and her hard life growing up with an abusive father who is an alcoholic. Aunt May and Uncle Ben taking care of Peter as he's growing up, and MJ always kind of seeing him through her window at her aunt's house as like the next door neighbor, and they're kind of like going back and forth between their tough lives and how they're kind of similar. And then we go full on origin. We see the spider bite. We see the wrestling match. We see Peter building the costumes and developing the web technology and all that. Everybody's kind of familiar with it at this point. We see MJ as she leaves her house. As she's like watching Spider-Man on TV and kind of idolizing him. We again see the death of Uncle Ben. And MJ also has like, I think I might have skipped over it as I'm scrolling through this, but we also kind of see the recap of her sister getting pregnant and her not being there for her sister and kind of her regrets later on about that. We see Spider-Man track down the man that killed Uncle Ben, and MJ is kind of like going away for school and partying a lot and kind of using this like fun girl like party aspect of her life as like a cover for kind of her pain and what's going on with her personal life. We see Dr. Otto Octavius, and we get a recap of his origin as a scientist who is using mechanical arms to conduct some sort of science experiment that goes wrong. He wakes up in the hospital, and the the arms are fused to his body, and he kind of goes mad and becomes a supervillain. We go to part 2 in the graphic novel, and we see Spidey is fighting Kraven, and Kraven ends up getting away. We see MJ and Peter going back to their personal lives and their troubles going on. What else happens? Oh,
Nothing.
Aunt May gets sick because of a blood transfusion that Peter donated his blood for, and she has like radioactive like poison.
Yeah.
And
I'm not sure if that's really a thing, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Right. So to find a cure, he goes to Kurt Connors, and he kind of says that there's this thing called there's like this ISO or something like that.
Isotope?
Yeah, there's some sort of like cure that can be this thing that can be used. It's supposed to like stop radiation. And it turns out that Dr. Otto Octavius is also in search for this, and he steals all of this like ISO from this lab, so there's none left to cure Aunt May. So Peter dons the Spidey costume and tracks him down, and we get that famous lifting the building off of him scene as, you know, that fight ensues. He ends up getting some of this stuff and is able to help Aunt May. We see kind of like a montage of Spider-Man fighting all of his like greatest foes, like Green Goblin and these other two fools that I've never heard of. We see MJ. She's kind of struggling, always kind of thinking about Peter Parker and Spider-Man, because I think also too, it's kind of retconned at this point that MJ saw Peter get home and then sees Spider-Man swinging away from Aunt May's house. So she kind of put it together earlier on that Peter was Spider-Man. So this whole time she's kind of been like thinking about Peter and Spider-Man and wanting to be with him. And then we see the reintroduction of MJ as it happens in the comics, where she knocks on the door and she shows up and says her famous like "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot" line. It's kind of like retreading a lot of the stuff that's happened in the comics.
Right.
Doc Ock eventually comes back and starts wreaking havoc again, threatens Aunt May. I think he ends up being defeated or runs away or something like that. And then we cut into the future and we see Peter and MJ getting married. And Dr. Otto Octavius interrupts their their after party at Aunt May's house. And there's like a octopus robot that shows up and detonates, and there's a piece of paper that's left behind that says, "Parker, give me Spider-Man or watch your family die." So he has no choice but to don the Spidey costume and go fight Doc Ock. MJ's upset because it's their wedding night and he's kind of running off to go fight supervillains, and she's kind of like, is this really how it's going to be forever now? We see Doc Ock. He's built a new robotic costume that's like an ultimate octopus suit, and we see that he's developed this bomb with this isotope thing that he was searching for earlier on. And essentially it's this radioactive bomb that is filled with this stuff that eats radioactive material. So when the explosive goes off, all of New York will be dead, but the Earth will not have any like radioactive poisoning in it, so he is still able to rule the place that used to be New York safely. I guess. Anyways, Spidey ends up tricking Doc Ock into puncturing a hole into his underwater lab, and it floods, and Spider-Man and Doc Ock are fighting each other underground when the bomb eventually explodes, and we don't see Doc Ock again. Spidey comes home. He reconnects with MJ. He kind of fills her in on what happened, and then they live happily ever after.
So before we say anything else, we should confirm that this is kind of a greatest hits or summary of Peter and Mary Jane's entire lives. Many of the scenes that you mentioned are recreations. Like, for example, the scene where Spider-Man lifts up the whatever and breaks out. That's like an exact frame-by-frame recreation of a sequence by Steve Ditko, right? There's other famous scenes that I personally recognize. Now, I've read a lot of Spidey comics, but I haven't read all of them. So for all we know, this entire thing, right, is just kind of recreated from other scenes. But without footnotes or endnotes, I don't know exactly what's what.
Right.
But it is also rewriting history a little bit, because we saw when we reviewed 80s Spidey that when Spider-Man revealed his identity, when Peter Parker revealed his identity to Mary Jane in, I think, the 250s or 260s, she was like, "Oh, I always knew you were Spider-Man," which is a retcon. So now in this book, I believe this is the point where they try to say that she knew basically from the beginning in Amazing Fantasy 15, which is, I think, a little bit of a stretch, but we'll talk about that later. But other than that, we have Gerry Conway, who's, the writer of Spectacular and Web, who's a solid writer, kind of weaving this all together. And we have Alex Saviuk, who's the artist of Web, who now we know why he's missed 3 issues of Web, because he's been drawing this, because it came out chronologically at the same time that we're reviewing these comics. Okay. So, knowing all that and what they're trying to do, I want to know, where the hell is Parallel? He didn't show up at all. I've been waiting this whole 64 pages, but whatever. We'll talk about that later. But Bob, why don't you tell us what your first impression is of this comic?
My first impression was I really like the art.
Okay.
The story just is what it is. It's a lot of just recap of things we already know mostly. But I thought the art was great. Okay. He obviously spent a lot of time on it, a lot of detail. He captured that early 60s vibe, or I guess mid 60s, whatever. Yeah. And kind of transitioned more and more into newer and newer art style. So I thought the art was fantastic. So I guess that's my first impression.
Yes, and I agree. I think Alex Saviuk is a great artist. When he does Web, he's inked by Keith Williams, who's a decent inker, but this is definitely better. This is like clearly taking a step up. And, at this time, Marvel was flooding the market with graphic novels to kind of drown out the independents. And some people might complain that this didn't deserve to be a graphic novel, but I think that at the very least, they were putting a little bit of extra effort into this. So I think you're definitely right. The art is great. Josh, what's your first impression of this?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. There's definitely parts where I kind of started to skim a little bit, just because
you've read it before.
We've seen Uncle Ben's death. We've seen the origin. I'm not sure at the time if this was really common to see kind of chronologically what happens to Spider-Man. You kind of just have to pick up an issue and you pick up the pieces of his origin, because I'm assuming Amazing Fantasy 15 or whatever it was not very common to actually have to get the origin. So it's kind of wherever you piece it in from flashbacks in regular issues. So I bet you this was really great to grab this and be able to see kind of the history of Spider-Man and how everything came to be, both with him and his origin and with MJ, and kind of get everybody up to speed about kind of their relationship and what's been going on leading up to their marriage, and then now what's going on in the comics, or what then was going on in the comics. So I thought it was pretty well done. I thought the recapping was kind of nice, that it was things that we had kind of seen before, but done in a little bit of a different way. The important things that are very iconic, like MJ knocking on the door or him lifting the building up in the rain, is kind of shot for shot, so everybody can kind of get that same feeling from when it originally happened, without having to just reprint issues.
Right.
So yeah, I know I really I enjoyed this one. The art's really great. It was also kind of nice to reintroduce Doc Ock. I have a feeling that this is a new Doc Ock story that was made for the graphic novel. And we kind of see the parallel of Peter and MJ and how their relationship is very similar, but also how Spider-Man and Doc Ock's relationship is kind of parallel, but how Doc Ock kind of went into the opposite direction as Spider-Man, where this like bad thing happened to him and he chose to use that power for evil and kind of see his descent into a bad guy. And he develops this explosive device as Spider-Man is developing who he is as a superhero and seeing him kind of like become the hero and him become like the ultimate villain. Even the like that protein or whatever that he's stealing that is supposed to save Aunt May is the same thing that is supposed to like help build the bomb. It's kind of nice to see that it like it's something small, but it was like this thing that he had been building up throughout the years. So it's kind of like, you know, just sprinkled in. Yeah, no, I thought it was pretty fun and surprisingly a good read for having seen this so many times.
Right. Okay, Bex Luthor, what's your impression of Parallel Lives?
No, I loved it. I agree with everything Josh said. I thought it was a great, just recap of everything that's been going on. And because it wasn't just 4 issues ago we learned about Uncle Ben died, and now we're retelling Uncle Ben dying again, and it was like its own self-contained thing. It was definitely a lot better than sometimes when I understand not everyone reads every issue, but when you talk about Uncle Ben dying 5 issues in a row, I'm like, okay, I get it. And the best part of this whole thing is getting that Mary Jane introspective, because you really learn so much more about her. And it's it's like, this is what's happening to Spider-Man, but you know all that. But while this was happening to Spider-Man, this is what was happening to Mary Jane, and how that is very on the opposite side of what was going on with Peter at the time. So it's really, I like it a lot. I like the Mary Jane centric stuff when it's just really putting a character to her, and she's just not Peter's wife or Peter's girlfriend. It's like, oh, this woman had an entire life before Spider-Man, and it influences her current life. That's great stuff. Yeah, I think the Doc Ock stuff, it could have been anybody, really, right?
Sure.
It didn't necessarily need to be Doc Ock, but I like him in this a lot, and it's nice that they made sure to be like, don't forget, he liked Aunt May for a bit. Don't forget about that. No, I don't really have anything bad to say. It's gorgeous to look at. The recreations are fantastic. Like the Mary Jane splash page, obviously. I love all the wedding stuff. It's great. I love that it doesn't go too much into certain things. We don't even talk about Gwen's death, really. It's just oh, she's died, and that's it. I was like, thank God, because this isn't about Peter's other love interest. This is about Peter's life with Mary Jane. So that's nice. But yeah, Josh mentioned, what page was that? When there's a montage of Peter fighting
other villains,
bad guys.
Yeah.
And what page is that on?
It's in the second chapter, I believe.
The second chapter?
Yes.
And it's some sort of Spider-Man montage.
Right at the end of the second chapter.
I'm trying to find that.
It's a few pages
Part 2,
before.
Encounters.
Yeah, I don't have the page number,
on digital. I'm trying to find it. Digital page. Actually, it's the same page numbers as the comic. Wow, I can't find it.
Yeah, it's above. It's a few pages above when MJ goes to see Peter and says the "hit the jackpot, Tiger" line.
That was before that?
Yeah, a couple of pages before.
Yeah, okay, I see it. It's when Mary Jane's mom dies.
Yeah.
Oh, he's fighting Green Goblin and Master Planner.
Sure.
Isn't Master Planner just Doc Ock?
Wait, no. The guy with the purple, I think, is the Crime Master.
Okay.
And then the guy with like the robot eye, I don't know who the hell
The
that
robot
is.
monocle? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know.
They picked two characters that nobody knows. Even at the time, these aren't characters in the comics currently.
Right. No, they were definitely like probably big at that time. Okay.
It's Meteor Man, but he's the looter now.
Oh, yes. Okay, so here's the thing.
Of course.
Of course it's the looter. Everyone knows the looter. So here's the thing. I did enjoy reading this, and I pretty much followed exactly, Josh, what you said. I skimmed read some parts, but I enjoyed the art and I enjoyed the writing. But here's my question, and I mentioned this when we talked about it before. What does everyone think about the retcon of Mary Jane always knowing that Peter Parker was Spider-Man?
I like it.
Bex Luthor, you go ahead.
It ties their destinies together. A lot. It's very comic booky. Is it dumb? Yes, but I like it. I think it's cute. I think it adds so much more to Mary Jane being so distrusting and non-committal towards her relationship to Peter because she's always known that he just throws himself into danger. Like, so she's, even before she went on a date with him, she was like, I'm going to fall in love with this guy and he's going to break my heart because something's going to happen. And she's always known that. And I think that's romantic.
Okay, I think it's crap. Anyway, Bob, what do you think?
It just don't get it.
I just personally, it's like, okay, some retcons are good, some retcons are bad. But to me, once Peter Parker reveals his identity, you have an opportunity for surprise, shock, whatever. But instead it's, I already knew. I knew the whole time. How is that an improvement? I don't know. How is that better?
I don't like necessarily that they retconned it, but seeing this on its own, I think works really well. Like, it works really, really good in the story. I think it doesn't make sense that they had to go back and retcon it. Like, it's pointless. Yeah. But I think it really works for this story, especially seeing their lives and how they parallel each other. And like Bex was saying, like her mistrust of Peter and like not wanting to open up, but always being curious about Spider-Man and Peter. It also makes sense why like she is so interested in Peter Parker.
Right.
So yeah, I think I like it in this issue. Did it need to be done and retconned? Definitely not, but it works here.
Okay, that's a good point. Bob, what do you think?
Kind of a combination of the two. As I read it, I didn't like it, but the more I read the issue, I kind of realized it's just a retelling of the Spider-Man story. It doesn't have to be the official story. I don't know if they made it the official story. It sounds like they probably did. But in my head, it was like, okay, this is just kind of a fun retelling of the Spider-Man story. So in that sense, I agree. It works in this story. So I became okay with it the more I read of the story. Okay. But at first, I was like, no, this is dumb. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so here's...
Sorry. I was going to say, I really like how it reflects off of Peter's past relationships, because Gwen was in love with Peter but never knew Spider-Man. Felicia was in love with Spider-Man but wasn't in love with Peter, and Mary Jane is in love with both halves of Peter, and she always has been.
Right.
And like, that's cool. Yeah. I like that.
Okay, well here's the other question is Alan Moore, everyone knows Alan Moore, he once said that Marvel kind of was, as I mentioned earlier, flooding the market with graphic novels. Because for anyone that doesn't know, graphic novel today, people use it as a term for anything that's a good comic book. Like Walking Dead is a graphic novel, but X-Men is a comic book, right? But back in those days, graphic novel meant, like glossy format, standalone story, usually creator owned, kind of like competing with novels or like movies or whatever. But Marvel saw this market and decided to flood the market with their own graphic novel series, and they released one every month. And sometimes they would take comics that were meant to be regular comics, like say New Mutants #1, and they're like, okay, add in a few pages, it will make it a graphic novel, and it became Marvel graphic novel number, I think 4 or 5. That was the first appearance of the New Mutants. And so my question is, did this story justify a graphic novel on shiny paper? And by the way, this was not published as a regular size comic. This was like about, Rolling Stone magazine size graphic novel.
interesting.
So did this book justify that format? Bob, what do you think?
I mean, justify is a vague word there. No, but considering that when I pulled this up, they made 70 of these graphic novels?
Something
sure,
like that, yeah.
I'm sure it's better than half of whatever they did, probably more than that. But I mean, so that's where it's like, what does justified mean? If they'd made 10, probably not. But they made so many. This one's got to be better than most.
Maybe.
So
I don't know. I've only read the only other one I've ever read is the New Mutants one, so I don't know. I don't think I've ever read any of the others.
I mean, the New Mutants was pretty good, but have you read Dreadstar? Have you read, let's see,
No.
Call,
Has
The Veil of
anybody-
Shadow, Black Widow, The Coldest War? There's many where that came from.
I'm sure.
Bex Luthor, what do you think? Does this justify the format?
In the era that it was printed in, I'd say absolutely, because this is Peter Parker's origin, basically, with extra content. And in a world where reprints are not yet a thing, or you cannot just download the digital copy and read comic books that are now costing thousands and hundreds and thousands of dollars, definitely. Like, if you were a kid in the 80s, this might be the first time you would get to pick up and read Spider-Man's origin in its entirety. Like, you can get bits and pieces out, like we were saying, throughout reading the comics, but this is like... This would be like your holy grail as a Spider-Man fan if you were like 10 years old and you're like, this is what happened. This is all of it.
For sure.
So I think in that sense, this makes more sense than a lot of the other graphic novels that they published that could have just been 1 to 2 issue arcs in just regular comics. This makes more sense because it's like its own thing, and it's like, this is it. Plus extra Mary Jane and some Doc Ock stuff.
Josh, what do you
mean,
think? Go ahead, Becca. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I liked the other graphic novel we read too, the Hooky one. That's still one of my favorite things I've ever read.
Yeah. We did 2, right? We did Hooky and...
It was probably bad, that's why I can't remember.
What was the other one?
was really early on.
Spirits of the Earth. Remember that?
Nope.
No, the name isn't ringing a bell. What happened in that one?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Was that
sick.
wasn't that the one where he went on some dreamland adventure? Remember that?
Oh, there was like a wizard and children and
Yeah.
stuff.
I
Yes.
think Doctor Strange was in it. I don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah, that one, not worth it. This one, sure. Maybe we
Okay.
should have been a little more stingy with the graphic novels we were producing, but since when has Marvel ever been stingy about anything?
That's true.
Including now?
So apparently the difference between a comic and a graphic novel is the comics are serialized. So it's a ongoing story between issue and issue, and a graphic novel is supposed to be something that is self-contained.
Well,
So
yes, that was the former definition, but nowadays people will say that like I used Walking Dead. Like they'll say Walking Dead is a graphic novel, Cerebus is a graphic novel. Basically, they'll say anything that's considered good is a graphic novel. But if you go by the 80s definition, you're right. It's almost like saying movie and TV show, right? A graphic novel is a self-contained thing that exists on its own, and a comic book is like a TV show, serialized, pumped out every month, right? So that's probably a better definition, because there are good TV shows and there are good monthly comics, right? So I don't know.
yeah,
Bob,
sure.
What do you think, Bob? Do you know what the difference is between a graphic novel and a comic book?
I mean, what Josh said, I think, is entirely right. Your point is valid. That's what people have been kind of saying, but they're definitely wrong.
Mhm.
Right.
To me, a graphic novel is a single contained story. It is a novel in graphic form.
Right.
Yeah. Serialized issues are not graphic novels. They may be collected into like trade paperbacks, and some people might try to call that a graphic novel, but that's not what it is.
Right.
It's just a collection. But yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of people is like, if it's, I think your analysis of a good comic book is called a graphic novel. That's the demarcation line. If somebody says, "Oh, this is nearing some hoity-toity concept of art," I don't know, then it becomes a graphic novel, which doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. So I guess our final question is, do we recommend this graphic novel? Josh, do you recommend this?
Sorry, somebody was revving their engine outside my house.
Oh, okay.
So I muted.
I thought you were going to say someone was rubbing your leg, and I hope it's your dog. But
no. Yeah, I would recommend this to anybody who wants to get into reading Spider-Man, specifically 80s Spider-Man comics. It's a great introduction to the character and its origin, and catches you up to what's going on around this time. The art is great. I think it's better than any other form of his origin that I've read in a while. Maybe besides Spider-Man Life Story, this is, I think, the best origin of Spidey in the comics.
Okay,
I've
Bex
read.
Luthor.
Yeah, no, absolutely read it. Kind of wish we would have read this before we did 150 episodes of a podcast, because it does summarize it all real neat and pretty. But no, this is, I think, this, if anyone's interested in 80s or prior Spider-Man, this should be recommended reading. Just as like a, hey, heads up, this is kind of what happens. Now, you can read 90s Spider-Man. Like, I mean, there are lots of 80s comics that I would recommend that people do read if they're interested in Spider-Man, but if they're interested in just starting at the wedding, the marriage, like starting at the late 80s, early 90s, this is a great way to just jump in.
Right.
Because there's a lot of Spider-Man comics.
Yes, there are.
This is condensing like 300 issues of amazing, however many of Peter Parker and Spectacular Spider-Man, everything Spider-Man related up to this point, basically into a neat little package of you to go, okay, now you know the gist of it, and you can read Spider-Man. And I think more comic books should do that. Like, I know there's a lot of little, because like there's so much history, right? That's the big thing with so many people we hear about like reading comic books, is they have no idea where to start, because they're like, do I start reading in the 60s? Do I start reading in the 80s? Do I start reading the modern stuff? Like, I don't know what to read. So just like read stuff like this and then start off wherever you want, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
agreed.
Also, it's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. Good. It's like the best art he's ever done.
Alex Saviuk will be happy to hear that.
I mean, I'm not usually his art, it's fine, but he's like shining, right? Like, this is an achievement in comic book art.
Sweet.
Am I not wrong?
Yeah, I agree. Bob.
Just the shots of Peter? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, you know what? And the thing is this also shows how someone can benefit from having a little bit of extra time to spend on their art, right? Well, they're not trying to just pump it out for a deadline, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Because there's just like those reshots of Mary Jane or the Peter pushing up the building are fantastic.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, pretty much for all the reasons Beck said. It's a great recap. And even if you're not planning on just jumping in somewhere, it's a fun little recap of things you probably know of, but it's a retelling of it basically. And the art is spectacular. That's what I would say. It's worth it. Even if you don't read it, it's worth it just to look at all the art, because it's great.
Okay. Now, and I do recommend this comic. I didn't think it was a masterpiece, but it's definitely a nice summary. Like, it's almost like Becca said, that you could read this first to kind of get like a overall picture of everything, and then dive into the rest of the stuff. But for those that are looking for more Spider-Man graphic novels, we did mention Hooky and Spirits of the Earth. And I looked up the Marvel graphic novel series, which goes until 75. There's one more Spider-Man graphic novel coming, and that's Fear Itself. So try to check that out. It's co-written by Gerry Conway and Stan Lee, if you can believe that, with art by 70s legend Ross Andru, who drew Amazing Spider-Man after Gil Kane left, I think. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. I've never read it, but I've got it on my list now, so I'm going to read that for sure. Yeah, we want to thank Bob for joining us. Thank you, Bob, so much for coming out this week.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
I always like showing up.
For sure. We'll definitely have you on again in the near future. We want to thank Bex Luthor for joining us.
You're welcome. It's nice that when we have a guest, the comic's good this time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I did appreciate that.
It's a rarity. It's a rarity on the show. And
unfortunately, sometimes it ends up not being so great. Like, we had no guests during Craven's Last Hunt at all, so that was fun.
No, we
And
did.
then-
We had Tim
we?
Gerard from Border City, remember?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. His only appearance. And he's like, this is great. They read amazing comics
I
on
know. I'm
this
like, no, we don't. We don't, actually.
No, we read Secret Wars. I saw Jim Shooter at a convention
When?
last weekend.
Are you
He was at London Comic Con.
What?
Really?
Yeah, no one was at his
I
table.
would have gone.
Oh my god.
He was just like sitting there. Nobody was there. And I was like, I said too many mean things about this man on the internet. I can't say hello to him.
Wow.
He looks great, though.
Dang, I wish I was there. Anyway. All right. Well, anyway, thank you so much. Josh, you can take it from here.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. It really helps you leave us a review or leave us a comment. You can find us anywhere you can find podcasts. You can also find us on our Facebook or Twitter page or on our website at comicbooksyndicate.com. Please let us know what you guys think about the issues we're talking about. Let us know what you guys think a graphic novel is versus a comic book. We'd love to hear about that, I'm sure. Yeah, keep in touch. Next week, Mike and I are going to be talking about another 3 episodes from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, so look forward to that. And yeah.
That's right. And until next Monday, Spider Friends, go for it!